I had a lot of requests today for people that had other meetings, but they really wanted to refer to this. So, so sort of going down the list that I've just got on my screen, we've got Dr. Jeffrey Ash, who is the Associate Dean for Diversity and Inclusion from the University of Maryland School of Nursing. Welcome, Jeff. And Jeff has an amazing background on this topic. Obviously, you can tell by his title, but also he was on the faculty at the Erickson School for Aging Studies, so he's very familiar with our world and this subject matter. Sumbul Johnson, Sumbul is a home care provider, frontline worker, home care provider. We've got Arvette Reed, who's with Signature Estate Investment Advisors and the Life Care Affordability Project. And Arvette has worked in a variety of positions from aging in place, hospice to senior housing, and is now in financial services in the senior living industry. Cordell Martin, who's at Tribute at Melford, a new assisted living in Prince George's County. Cordell, welcome. And we've got Todd Walrath, who's the and David Posner. Sorry, I didn't put both of you guys on there. Todd Walrath is CEO of homecare.com, and David Posner is with homecare.com, and they're going to tell us about an initiative, Nurses Against Racism, that their organization has formed and how that came about. And so I'm going to drop off the screen here and you'll just hear my voice, but before I do that, I just want to say a few opening words on why we're exploring this topic, which is pretty obvious. This topic is headline news all over the place, along with COVID-19. But the catalyst to have this discussion was actually, I credit Todd and David because they run a home care business and that has a lot of African American workers, and they engaged in a survey to see what they could do. And Todd and David, why don't you just come on? Here, let me unmute yourself and just tell us a little bit about what you discovered in the survey and the initiative that you started, which actually prompted this discussion.
Sure, and thank you for having us, and thanks everybody for attending today. I'm Todd Walrath with homecare.com, and we have about 2,500 employees in our company nationally, and we were struggling with what our response to this should be. We participated in some of the social media stuff. We gave people time off for Juneteenth. We did some of the most obvious things that we could do to be supportive of some of the things going on out there. But we didn't really know exactly how we wanted to approach it. So we started off by sending a survey out to 2,000 employees. We got several hundred responses back. So that was the first thing we knew we were kind of onto something, because we don't usually get that much feedback from even our own team sometimes when we ask things from corporate. And the feedback was very authentic, and it was it was personal. That's kind of what I took away from that. And they gave us some guidance on how they would like us to approach this. And one of the themes that we kind of came away with was, don't just say you support us, but show us how you're going to support us and tackle some of these issues that we're dealing with on the front lines. And Sumbul is one of the folks who I think is going to talk about her experiences today. But we got a lot of feedback from people directly. The second thing we did was we went out to all of the healthcare providers that we know in the DC area, and we said, are you struggling with this too? And they said yes, and we came together to form a coalition. It's called Nurses Against Racism. It's at nursesagainstracism.com. There's a Facebook site. And what we're doing is we're creating a coalition so these companies can talk to each other, compare notes, take action, and make sure that we're turning our words into definable action, and we're kind of highlighting the things that the different companies are doing on that website. And we welcome you. It doesn't cost money. It's not a fundraising thing. It's just really a spotlight that we can put on all the companies in healthcare that are supporting their employees. And that's kind of how the idea came about.
Great. Well, thanks for bringing this topic, and thanks for your efforts there. And so what the spirit of this panel is for these panel members to just share their perspective. And as we came together to plan this out, I sort of felt like a great model is one that one of my coworkers attended he works for Amazon.com, and one of their responses to the events and what's happening on this topic was to do something similar. And he said that it was very eye-opening, and he walked away with it with a lot more empathy because he heard multiple different perspectives, and it helped him reflect. And so I hope that this panel can do that for all of us today too. And so again, as a reminder, we're going to sort of kick this off, and if you've got questions, if you've got comments, either type them into Q&A, or when we kind of get through our panel members sharing some of their perspectives, then you can raise your hand and we'll bring you on. So I really am delighted that we've got Dr. Jeffrey Ash with us today. So Dr. Ash, if I'm going to ask you to unmute, and would love for you to just sort of share your perspectives on this topic as it relates to the senior living field, which I know you're very familiar with.
Well, excuse me. Thank you, Steve. Thank everyone. Thank you for the invite. You know, our world, our emotional and our emotional strings are wound really tight these days, not only in aging, higher education, our world. We're in the midst of a pandemic. What's on most folks' minds here of late is just the issue around race and racism. So I'm just overwhelmed and really excited that, you know, opportunities like this have come about more frequently, because the way we go about getting to change is, number one, having a conversation. We have to have a conversation about this, and the sentiment you expressed earlier, saying the wrong thing. Well, we all sort of experience that, but we all misspeak at times. So this starts with, one, to me, having a conversation. Two, trust behavior number one, as the previous speaker mentioned, is be authentic. So this is a great place to start when I think of just racism. That's not something new. We've just seen it. It's been more in our eyes right up front. So, you know, really the question is, where do we go from here? It's about, to me, really acknowledging the space that you're in. I think it's a great format to survey folks, to hear from folks one-on-one. There's a lot of emotion, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of resentment, but know that rage and anger, that's not a strategy. That's not a strategy at all. So where do we go from here? One, we acknowledge this. We really hear and meet people where they are. Part of Brene Brown's work states that, you know, as leaders, it's okay to be vulnerable. So I know one of the things we've been doing in our work is having town halls where we just hear from students, we hear from faculty, So I'd encourage all of us as leaders in senior living and aging to really hear from folks, because what I think you find in our organizations, there's some perceptions about how things are, and sometimes those perceptions are actually not true. Sometimes those perceptions are spot on. So when they're not true, it's really about, as leaders, how do we change the narrative when those perceptions about our organization are not true or not accurate? When they are accurate and do expose barriers to equity and inclusion, as leaders, we have to drill down to figure out why and what's causing these barriers. So I think that this is where we are. And again, it starts with a conversation. No one has all the answers, right? Nobody has all the answers. I remember doing a session once, and a participant asked me, "Is there a manual?" Like, well, there's no manual. People don't come. Human beings are not put together that easily. So there's no manual with all the answers. We're all evolving. The thing I've learned with diversity inclusion, I think that's transferable across any industry, is it starts with you, starts with me. And way too often I've heard people say, well, as soon as somebody else changes or does something, then I'll do it. It's not conditional. It starts with you, it starts with me. And the moment we're in really is requiring us to really take a hard look at ourselves and our organizations, and really caring, but also caring enough to say something or do something. So that's the space I think we're in. I don't know how I could go on the whole 50 minutes, so I'll sort of exit at this point. But that's sort of my thinking. Racism, and some of the barriers to equity inclusion are not new. They're not new at all. But we're at a point in our country where we've all witnessed and we all saw some things that really have moved us in a way where we're at a point where we can't run from it or kick the can down. But we're not going to solve this. We're not going to solve world peace in the next hour. So the important thing, I think, is to continue these conversations, to build on those, to see where we're vulnerable as leaders and organizations, really reach out to people, see where they are, and again, really try to match the perception with the reality. So again, if the perception is real, how do we change that? When it's not accurate, how do we then change the narrative for us? So thank you for this. I'll bow out and give others some time. I think you're muted.
Yeah, I intentionally muted myself. Okay, no, but thank you, Dr. Ash, and I knew you'd be the perfect person to give us a broad overview. And then as we move through the panel, hopefully what the attendees see is that we put together a diverse panel from from all the different segments in senior living. And so I'm delighted that we've got Sumbul Johnson with us, who is a frontline caregiver, caring for our elders. And as we know, and I think I shared a link with everybody from Senior Housing News, the diversity of our caregivers is in many ways a lot different than the diversity in our corporate environments, which is something that this Senior Housing News article addressed, and it's something that I hope we talk about today. But Sumbul, can you share some of your thoughts on this topic, and from the perspective of the position that you hold? And
can you hear me?
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. And tell us, your role, and you're a home care, you're a frontline provider with homecare.com, I believe, correct?
I am. I've been with them for a couple of years. Thank you, David, for having me. And thank you, Steve, for having me. Sorry, I'm a little nervous. Let's see here. Of course, I work for home care and I take care of the elderly. I do privately. I work with nursing homes, assisted living. Of course, like we experience racism, not every day, but sometimes we do. I'm not saying it's the right thing, but people have their notions about half of us caregivers. Um, what I run into majority is like, um, they automatically think because we're foreigners and we don't know what we're doing, or, you know, we can't speak English, they already have like their notions about us already till we get in there. I think main thing is you have to stay positive and try to understand. Sometimes like, um, you have to show yourself that their notions about you is totally wrong. Sometimes it takes harder for some people to understand, but if you react to their actions that they're already racist towards you because of your race, your religion, your background, I think you stay positive and you don't react like negatively to their emotions. Try to understand where they're coming from, and then you present yourself, and you let somebody know, I understand how you're feeling like this, but then you explain yourself. I think it works out great, like majority, like every client I work with, um, I've been discriminated because of my name, because if they can't pronounce it, obviously they don't want me in the facility or their home, due to like maybe the English barrier, the understanding. Not that I believe they're racist against me. I think it's just their notions they're having about majority of us who work for home care. Um, but I think like once you get in and you understand them and explain yourself to them, some people, majority of the people are understanding, and you can kind of get through and understand where they're coming from and where you're coming from. And it works out pretty good. But then there are some cases where people have their just mindset, they're just making excuses, maybe the language barrier, what part of the world you come from. They just have like this barrier where they're just not trying to understand you. And all we can do is the best. And our company, Home Care, is great. They're always supporting us. And that's the best, we can do. And just try to understand and have empathy for these people. And we can't act negative because they're acting negative towards us, because then it wouldn't be a difference between any of us. And some of them are really, really ill. They're frustrated with their illnesses. They're frustrated with everything, and sometimes they think that acting negatively towards us, it might make them feel better.
You know, Sumbul, this is a really interesting perspective, because I think when we think about racism and discrimination in the workplace, we think more of employers and employees and, fair hiring practices and things of that nature. But you're raising a topic that I didn't really expect us to explore, and that is that the client, the person that's paying for you to serve them, is potentially has differing views. And so I really appreciate you bringing this to my attention and to our attention in this discussion. It's a perspective that I think I've not heard a lot written about, when your customer is potentially um, discriminating or
Hmm.
not communicating in a proper way.
Yeah. Yeah, our companies are great. Like I work from homecare.com. I work for Georgetown Home Health Care in Washington, D.C. as well. Never had any issue with any of my, coworkers, any of the CEOs, anything like that. They're very kind, they're very understanding. And when you go into places where they're showing racism, it's not that our company has set that up for us. Like I was telling David a week ago, um, there's nothing that companies can do. Your clients are who they are. You just kind of have to work with it. And I think if you work with them and you show your positive side, take the negative, turn it into a positive, because it's not always about us. It's about the client, because we don't know what they're dealing with or what they have dealt with, in the past. So I always think positive, stay positive, and try to approach any negative issue with a positive.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing that perspective. And I'm sure we'll once we kind of open things up, we'll get some more perspective from you. And I'm gonna just move right above, at least on my screen, right above Sumbal is Arvet. If we're looking at this like a
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm going to echo again, Todd and David, thank you for stepping up and even bringing this up. I mean, that is amazing and awesome and true leadership from the industry to do this, and Steve helping to put it together. So I want to echo a little bit on Sumbal's comments before I go into my own. I think it's very important that those of us who have worked in the industry, now remember, I worked in senior housing and healthcare for 15 years. So right now I'm adjacent to it, but I still consider myself part of the industry. Imagine what your life would be like if out of the 5 days of your workday, you were feeling racism and then had to go home every day to your family and live your life on the weekends. So I think the goal of this panel is for you to take the opportunity to put yourselves in the shoes of someone else. And, you know, we've talked about what it's like to have clients and families be negative towards staff. I mean, I experienced it myself, where they just thought because of the color of my skin, I wasn't the appropriate person for them to talk to. They were supposed to talk to the white person that was sitting next to me, even though I was the person in charge, right? So that's just the reality of our world. But the one point I would like to share with you guys today, and those of you who know me well, is, you know, I'm pretty open about what I feel and what's happening in my world. And when coronavirus hit, the people in senior housing and healthcare, that's what we talked about. That's what we were focused on. How are we going to sustain our business? How are we going to take care of our clients and our families and our residents? But at the same time, people of color were going through a whole different movement. So we were dealing with two big things at the exact same time. So let me be clear. The Black Lives Matter movement is not new. I mean, this has been a movement for a long time. And I'm going to give you my perspective as a mother of a Black teenager, right? So I have always worried about my teenager on the street. I have always had to tell him that when he walks, keeps his hands out of his pockets because people will think you're shady. If you have a hoodie, I would prefer you not wear your hood because people think you're shady. If you are going into a store to buy something, go out of your way to say hello to the workers so they don't think you're trying to hide and steal something, right? If you are walking around and you see somebody, just smile, because then they're going to think you're less threatening. So these are the things that I have had to teach my children, and lots of my friends and families have had to teach their children for decades. This is not new, right? So now, in the middle of the Black Lives Matter movement, where there's so much social unrest and so much conversation about social injustice, not only are the people working in the industry stressed out about coronavirus, when we go home, we are also stressed out about how to keep ourselves, families safe in a Black Lives Matter social injustice situation. So historically, you know, healthcare, we're all chatty. We're very open about health issues and working with families, and we know each other's kids and talk about each other's kids. And there's that work-personal line that you just don't cross. You go oh so far, but you don't cross, right? You don't talk politics. You don't get too deep. Well, I'm encouraging the leaders in the industry to start crossing that line. I'm not saying go into politics. It's not what I'm saying. But cross the line and get a little bit more intimate with your employees and your staff and your coworkers. Like, hey, how's your teenager doing? Because when my coworker asked me about my son, I had to tell them he's angry. And it was the first time I'd actually had to say that to somebody outside of my family. He's angry, he's confused, social media and all these things that are popping up. Thankfully, he comes and shows it to me so I can have a talk with him. So you see the Arvet, the professional Arvet that's on the Zoom, that's doing the calls that you guys have known forever. But there's also that mom that is really afraid about what's happening right now. And I want to keep my children safe. And so that's what I encourage you is to take my story, to take Sumbal's story. And the next time you look into the eyes of a coworker or an employee of color, just know that there's something else happening in their head that you might not be aware of. And it's okay to ask how they're doing and how their family's doing.
That's a great perspective from the perspective of a parent, because those of us who are parents out there, you know, I can tell you personally, I've not necessarily had to have those types of conversations with my children because my children are white, and that's I really appreciate you sharing that perspective and broadening my vision. Let me put Arvette on mute, and we will move to Cordell, who is with Tribute at Melford, which is a senior housing provider. And so hopefully you guys sort of see that we've got a wide variety of professions and different, you know, at different levels and in different sized organizations here sharing their perspective. And we're excited to get, I see questions and comments are coming in, and we'll be jumping over to that here shortly. So Cordell, in the spirit of this panel, would love to hear your perspective on this topic.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, everyone. Let me start first and say I work for Tribute at Melford as a community relations coordinator. What you're hearing me say to you today is my words. I'm not speaking on behalf of Tribute at Melford, but as Dr. Ash suggested and said, I'm going to speak to you my perspective from my truths and from experiences that I have lived. But I also want to go back to what Sumbul said about being empathetic to folks that are displaying racism to them. Forgive me, but I don't feel that that's a requirement. I don't believe that that is something that we should have to do. I think that if you have an employer who is putting you in an environment, not necessarily intentionally, but puts you in an environment where you are dealing with that, then I think part of their responsibility should be that they express to that potential client a code of conduct. You deserve to be respected. You deserve to not be called out of your name. You deserve to be given the same opportunity that people that don't look like you are given. And I don't think because someone is elderly or because they are a different complexion or because they're, or whatever the reason you want to add to that, that gives them the right to be disrespectful to you. I believe that empathy is important to put yourself in someone else's shoes, but if the shoes that you're putting yourself in are based in a non-logic and based in a belief that you are somehow less than, how do you win? So I just think that, you know, I say this to my granddaughter and to my kids all the time, there's a greatness within you. There's a greatness within Arvette. There's a greatness within Dr. Ash and certainly Mr. Posner and Mr. Walrath and Steve. We all have that within us, and therefore, because of that greatness, it deserves to be respected. And I think if a business has a customer that doesn't want to respect that, then they have an obligation to keep you out of harm's way and to do the right thing by you, which is to make it clear to that particular client what your feelings are and how they're expressing them to you and if it's inappropriate. The other piece that I wanted to address was, you know, this topic started off as about equity. And I love that we're having this conversation, but I would also say to the corporations or the giants that are out there or small businesses, if you look around your boardroom and you don't see people that look like me, that look like Sumbul, that don't look like Arvette, then just saying that we give you a certain date off because it's something that's special to you, or just saying that, you know, Black Lives Matter, it means nothing, because the equity piece of this, the ability to be a part of an organization, the ability to grow within an organization, the ability to see an actual career path that says that I don't have to look at this as just a job. This is actually a place that I can grow with. If they're not in that boardroom, then quite frankly, you failed. If they're not part of your senior management team, then quite frankly, you failed. And we can have 50 of these meetings, but if you don't have a good mix of folks, because they're out there, they're talented, and they're looking for opportunities. But it always bothers me when I hear people say, well, I can't find. That's not true. There's too many talented people on this planet to say you can't find. Legitimately, if you're looking, all you have to do is open your doors and they'll walk through. So I guess that's my piece.
That's really good, Cordell. Great. Everybody shared just a very interesting perspective. And yeah, I recommend that everybody read the Senior Housing News article that I shared in the chat at the beginning of this session, because the topic that Cordell brought up in terms of diversity throughout the full level of an organization is really the primary topic that addressed. So we've got questions that are, oh, and sorry, David, I apologize. David, I'd love for you to share some perspective as well on this topic, and then to all of our panel members, just raise your hand this way if you'd like to sort of add to any additional thoughts, but then we'll start getting to the audience questions and audience discussion. But David Posner with homecare.com and Nurses Against Racism.
First off, again, thank you. And again, thanks everyone for kind of being on this panel. And of course, everyone that's, participating today and watching. So, just being here, I think definitely starts the process. So I'll be quick. I kind of just want to talk about two things, and it's all regarding what Cordell said, our vet, awareness and education. One of the things that I find just talking to referral sources, communities, families, is just they don't know what to do. And, to Cordell's point of, open the doors and look, I don't think a lot of people, especially, white corporate people like myself, sometimes we just don't know what to do. And, one of the things I love about, Nurses Against Racism, what we've done is we're just coming up with ideas. So we're just, what we've listed on our website is just ideas of just different corporations and what they're doing to start the process. And I think that's where a lot of this starts. It's just education. It's just awareness. So, I'll do my 5-second pitch as far as, anybody who's doing things, please let us know so we can put it on the website. The second thing, I'll get in 1 second. The other thing is on the flip side is with families. And again, this goes back to just education and awareness. And I think what happens is a lot of our referrals, again, Symbols is amazing. As you can hear her speak. She's one of our best caregivers. And care, if a family has a bad incident at a hospital or rehab or assisted living or anywhere, a lot of times they'll say, well, they'll never say, it's really interesting, my perspective. They'll never say, I don't want a Black caregiver. That I've never, ever gotten that request. What I get is, I don't want a caregiver with an accent. And that's my red flag to say, wait, let's slow this down a little bit. And it's my job, as an outside sales marketing representative, talking to families to educate them and say, well, let's talk. What's the most important thing to you? Is it someone? Let's describe it simple. Is it someone with 10 years of experience? Is it someone who's been with dementia families and knows how to redirect? Is it someone who knows how to understands Parkinson's and that medication's got to be on the hour? Or is an accent the most important thing to you? And when you put it in that perspective, families are like, well, yeah, I need someone that's going to be able to redirect my mom because she keeps trying to leave the house, every night at 6 o'clock. And that's where, a great caregiver like Symbol is able to kind of step in. Obviously, a lot of times I try to give her the heads up. She unfortunately faces it herself. But my whole point is just awareness and education. The more examples we can use today and talk about, the more ammo we'll have. So if we're on a corporate side, thinking of different ways to be able to support it, or for us marketing people that are out talking to families, just getting different verbiage, I think is really beneficial. But like I said, I'll try to be quick.
Great perspective, David. And the tragedy of COVID-19 and the incidents in Minnesota, it's amazing how community comes together in crisis. And the fact that you've created a forum where people can come together and share on this topic is only going to help everybody in the future. So Arvette?
I was just going to build on, David, your first point about how do organizations know what to do? Okay, so once again, diversity and inclusion is not new. I mean, corporations have been checking that box for decades. The key is now we're in a new time. So I would actually like to direct the question to Dr. Ash, is based on the current circumstance and where can people turn who are running these organizations to make sure that they're walking in the right direction and not just checking a box, which someone might have done 5 years ago, 10 years ago. There's got to be something different now, and I don't know what it is, so I'm hoping you can give us some insight.
Great. Whoops. There you go.
Well, that's a great question. And the first place I would think, and it goes back to sort of the awareness and training, awareness and education. There's no one place to go. There's no one place to go. I'll speak from my own experience. I'm in a number of diversity-related associations, and we all kind of go through this education sort of on the fly. So I would say the best place to go is to talk to colleagues who do diversity-related work. There's a number of writers that have done what I consider great works when they speak about race and racism. For example, I've followed the work for years of a writer named Beverly Tatum, Dr. Beverly Tatum. She's written a number of books on race, racism, racial development, how we all go through that. There's a Neuroscience Leadership Institute. I was headed a gentleman researcher that I've followed for years, Dr. David Rock. And David Rock has written a number of books on, a number of works, articles on like what are the barriers to inclusion based on neuroscience research. And the research is important, particularly for me in a higher education, is that educators want proof. They want to know, why should I, if I'm a researcher, why should I do this? So there's no one place to go, but I would say back to the education and awareness, I totally agree. We don't fix this by going to training for 2 hours. This is not the moment you referenced. What we saw in Minnesota, let me just give you an idea of the magnitude of this. This is more than just what happened to Mr. Floyd. This is hundreds of years of Mr. Floyd-like examples. This is every day. The examples you've heard of, the way caregivers are spoken to. This is not just this week, or this is decades upon decades of this. So it's not just training, it's not just reading a book, it's not just attending this event. Similar to the way you lose weight. You don't lose weight by just exercising. That might help, but you need to change your diet. What we're talking about right now, this moment, is that it's a lifestyle change. So there's no one place. I would say surround yourself with folks who do this work. There are tons of works written by, like I said, David Rock, Beverly Tatum. And I think mostly for me, I've had to rely on just colleagues and people who do this work, because sometimes these things happen and evolve and they rise to a level where no book or training has prepared you for. So I'll stop here, but that's a great question, but it's continuous work. It's continuous.
Great. Cordell, and
yeah, Steve. Yeah, to Dr. Ash's point, there's no one source, but I mean, let's look at it. This panel is convened here in the DC metro area. You've all heard of Howard University. You've all heard of Morgan State. You've all heard of UMBC. So if you're not doing active recruiting in those locations, then you're not looking hard enough. You know, I mean, you have people that belong to these football clubs where they can tell you a player's statistics, where he went to school, how many children he has, and yet we don't use that same kind of detailed searching for people that you say you're truly looking for. So I would say to employers out there that if you're actually actively looking for talented people, and you're saying you're looking for people that are diverse and that don't look like you, those colleges are less than 30 miles either direction, you know. So that's a great starting point. Yes, the books that Dr. Ash talked about and the writers and authors, but we don't have to make this that hard or difficult. You know, again, I think that, you know, if you talk to your HR people and you look at what is your process for looking at an application, one of the things that has always been challenging is that some corporations have made it seem as though that selecting a person of color or a female somehow is less than. And if that's what they think, you've got the wrong person making those decisions. If you're taking applications and based on names, certain applications never get reviewed, then you've got the wrong person handling the search for diversity. This country is too great to not take or use every essence that every symbol or RVET that's out there, or Dr. Ash that's out there, or future. It's too great to not look for those resources and bring them into your organization. I mean, it's just smart business. Hiring me or bringing in someone that looks like me is not a requirement of anything except being committed to the idea that this is what you want to do. And I say that not based upon complexion, but based upon talent. I'm talking about bringing in talented people. You know, I'm not talking about bringing in someone just so that you can say you fulfilled a quota, because that's often how it's presented. And so when you have that one or two people, and I want to go back to the equity piece as well. You know, I think, you know, as we are responding to this COVID, and we look at the number of small businesses that are out there, as that's the generator of a lot of the revenue for our country. I look at the opportunities that small businesses, minority-owned businesses are getting to participate in the process. The selection process, again, is typically having to speak to someone who is the diversity contact, and they somehow determine from hundreds and thousands of applications which business they can let through the pipeline to say, this is who we're going to do work with. That's not a true commitment. If the way that you've got that system set up is that everybody has to come through one person, if you're truly looking for talent, then I think the way you do that is you create an atmosphere where people not only are interested in your company, but they want to come work there. You know, you celebrate the Sumbles of the world because of her talent, because she can articulate the story of what she does, because she's a success. You know, she's what you promote. And then others will see that. And if you're looking for other Sumbles, ask Sumble. She'll tell you. I'm sure she's got friends out there, talented, that she can say, you know what, if you talk to this person, they're a good person. She's not going to risk her career by referring someone to you that she doesn't think is going to do a good job. So sometimes the easiest way is the simplest way.
Yeah, no, great points. And birds of a feather flock together. Todd, you had a comment, and I want to make sure I get to some of the questions that the audience has. And this is, guys, this is also a great opportunity for you to raise your hand if you'd like to share something verbally. Todd?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
So I just want to kind of echo what Cordell's saying. I mean, I would even go further. I think it's good business, right? I mean, you have frontline employees they want to see a career path. These are young, ambitious. We have a lot of young people in our company, and they're looking for, well, what are the opportunities that I have? Sorry, what are the opportunities that I have within this company to grow? DC, and the market in DC is, before COVID, was 0% unemployment, right? If you can't show them that not only that you may have an African-American frontline employee, but then look, we have an African-American manager and a credentialer and someone on the executive team, and they can kind of connect all these dots, and then they start to say, well, okay, I can see myself here because I see other people like me, and they're not just cordoned off on one part of the business. They have the opportunity to be the best at their job and get the next job and kind of grow. We don't want to be replacing people. There's a lot of turnover in healthcare. And there's a lot of African Americans that work in healthcare too, right? So if when they walk in the door and they look left and look right and they say, I'm not feeling it here, and they walk out, I mean, I think it's just good for business too. It doesn't have to be something that you're checking a box, to Arvette's point. We do struggle sometimes. The reality is sometimes we put something out there and we just don't get the diversity of candidates when we post on Indeed or on ZipRecruiter. We don't always see. I do have to make a conscious effort. But the reason we're making that conscious effort with the people making those decisions is because we're like, if we don't reflect the population overall, if we don't give all of our employees opportunity, they can't see the opportunity when they walk in the door, they're just going to work somewhere else where they do see those opportunities. So, to us, it's just it's just good business. So that's how I think of it. But that's been our experience a little bit.
Thanks, Todd. And let me get to some of these questions. Now, it's interesting that we're talking about our thoughts that we've been sharing just recently are on corporate recruiting. The questions from the audience, and again, those who want to verbally reflect these can raise their hand, are focused more on the topic that Sumbul brought up in terms of discrimination between customers and providers. I'm just going to kind of go down the list. Scott Bach Hansen said, has homecare.com or others refused a client because of their race issues? This is a question for the audience as well. Todd and David, have you had that issue, and all of our panel members, have you had an issue where you had to refuse service from a customer due to their behavior?
Sure. I mean, in our case, we've had to take caregivers off of cases. We've had caregivers in some cases that say, I don't want to go back there. And when we find out that why they don't want to go back, we tell the family that there isn't going to be anybody coming back because we can't put them in that environment. But to David Posner's point, sometimes a lot more subtle, right? There aren't a lot of people who are, holding up a sign saying things that we don't want to be said, right? It starts off with an accent or, and discrimination comes in many forms too, right? It's like, I want a thin caregiver. I want to, it's like crazy kind of requests. We even had to, in the beginning of our platform, we used to, for security purposes, because we have caregivers go out and interview with families, we used to send them a picture of the caregiver before they came into the house, which was an interesting human experiment because that's actually where we saw the most, what I would call blatant racism, where people would say, can you send me more caregivers with different pictures? And all of a sudden you're like, what's going on here? Like, I don't have like 1,000 people behind the curtain here. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is what's going on, right? So then we started really focusing on their qualifications, their experience, and not what they look like, how much they weighed, what kind of car they drove, whatever it might be. So yeah, I mean, I'm more worried about the hidden rate. I mean, we have, many, many discrimination policies in our contract with families. It says how they have to act in our training with our care advisors. We have that with our staffers, but it's more of the hidden thing that as a manager, I kind of worry about. That isn't going to be the first thing that the caregiver says. They want to be in good standing with the company, but you, as leaders, we have to say, it's okay for you to call us and tell us if you're in harm's way, because we want to hear that. And having more examples like that, I think open those lines of communication between your frontline workers. So.
Great. Thank you. Let's see. This is not necessarily a question, but a statement where somebody writes, definitely a topic, how racism addressed within an organization when the customer does not look like the staff. The frontline staff are almost always a minority and the resident client is a Caucasian. And so, you know, thank you for sharing that. That was an anonymous attendee. Latasha Banks says, do any agencies have discrimination policies in place when it is the caregiver being discriminated against? If so, are the policies explained to the care recipient? And this is, I could see this as being a great topic to share on the Nurses Against Racism site, you know, but I have somebody raising their hand. Sharon Dujon is raising her hand. Sharon?
Yes, hi everyone. Thanks so much for being candid and being totally open on this very sensitive topic. I want to shift it to a more of a micro level for some of us smaller assisted living providers. So you're in a 5-bed, 8-bed type facility, and it's almost generational, right? And you have the older client and the younger, you know, caregiver, and it's almost, you can't avoid it, that they have their own beliefs in each generation. So part of the struggle that I've had, and I'm just sharing that I'm trying to work on it, right? And one of the things we started is using activities as story time. We have a story time activity. You know, tell me your story is what we call it. And tell me your story has allowed us to let caregivers share a story to humanize themselves to the client and build that trust and sort of start breaking down those barriers, right? And in the middle of doing that, I had my own personal sort of wake-up call because I saw myself doing small things in reverse. I'm a minority, I'm a Black female, right? And I interviewed a family. I went to meet a family. I talked on the phone and I met the family. When I met the family, I saw shock on their faces because my name doesn't sound very Black. I'm Sharon Dujon, you know? And I walked in and the son was sort of like, wait a minute, you're a sister. He said that, you're a sister. And I'm like, okay. He said immediately, he sort of apologized and said, you know, I didn't mean it in that way. And then a sister, one of his sisters came. Guess what? His sister was Black and I couldn't figure it out. And I saw myself puzzled and wondering what kind of family is this? And I wanted to ask. And then I felt, you know what? This thing goes both ways. It's done primarily, yes, white to Black, but we as Black people sometimes have our own, you know, paradigms that we're operating from, and we can also be racist. So I felt a racist moment for myself where I didn't understand. How does this lady have a Black daughter? Her 2 sons are white. So I'm saying, let's share stories. That's why I started Storytime, our Storytime. It's going really well. I have seen a particular client really shift behavior because of it. So sit in that circle and let's just humanize ourselves and talk about it. Because on the micro level, it's really, really hard to address. Corporately, you can hire and you can do all those things that sort of diverse, make your staff and your corporate level diverse. But when you're in a small home, it's hard. And so I don't know if there are other ideas that you guys can share that we can use to help sort of break these barriers and connect it and minimize it. Sorry, I'm long-winded.
Man, Sharon, thank you for sharing that. I think the storytelling is a great solution that that we can all embrace. And I really appreciate you participating. Thank you. And let's see, Rachel Cohen asks, any other concrete suggestions for supporting frontline workers? So I'm just sort of throwing this out to the panel and to the audience. But Rachel, I really think that encouraging storytelling, encouraging deeper conversation between caregiver and client can make a big difference. Question for David and Sanibel from Elizabeth Robinson. Have you ever had to end care and services with a client who exhibited racism towards staff? And if you did, what did you tell them because of their behaviors? I think Todd outlined some scenarios where they have had to do that. So hopefully you caught that. Let's see. Let me bring Patricia Dubroff on. Patricia?
Hi, all. Thank you for a most elucidating afternoon. I really appreciate each of you being honest and forthcoming. I wanted to mention that at Assisting Hands Home Care, we started a Caregiver Advisory Council, which has been set up to help address all sorts of issues, but clearly this is the place where we're focusing now is on anti-racism, both, like Sumbal said, from some of these families whose loved ones have dementia and they're acting out in all sorts of not friendly ways, but racism isn't a tolerable piece at all. So, you know, it's just a place for our caregivers to get together and be able to help us launch initiatives for all the caregivers. And we're hopeful that that'll work well. I thought the note, Todd, that you said about how you got so many responses, or maybe it was David, that was wonderful. I mean, we've done so many fun things for our caregivers and we get, 10% response. Of course, with COVID, we've been getting more, and everybody's been looking at their phones a little more, and that's added another layer. But I think this is important. It's the talking that's so important. So thank you.
Okay, I appreciate it, and I appreciate you contributing as well. And we're at 2:00, but I'm just going to get through these remaining questions that are coming in, and just to let everybody in the audience know, we will be recording this. We are recording this. You will receive a copy of the recording and the chat transcript as well. I know there's lots of information being shared there. And Patricia brought this up in her comment. Charles Picard says, working with an aging population, you're dealing with clients who have dementia issues and may revert to some racial biases. Are we willing to make exceptions in these instances? Really good question, Charles, and I'll throw that one out to the panel. Is, as we know, we oftentimes revert with dementia disorders. It's sort of like, how do we kind of look at things with that behavior? Arvette, you wanted to comment on that?
Yeah, I want to say, I think it's going to be impossible for us to come up with all the policies and things, but I think what's most important is to acknowledge the issue, talk about the issue with your clinical staff openly. That is the key. So no one wants to create this hard line of no, in no circumstance, we can't take care of that person. I don't think that's fair to the industry, and I don't think it's fair to the families. I think what's fair is that as an organization, you need to address these issues. You need to come up with policies and procedures. You need to come up with discussion topics for family members, and just make sure you're looking at it holistically. And then just one thing I wanted to comment on, Sharon, and then Dave, I'll hand it over to you. You have to remember that your caregivers of color might have scars, right? So as I mentioned earlier, Subal, and I know I should have pulled you in, but you can only get beat up or cursed out so many times before you build a wall. So when you are dealing with that kind of abuse over and over again, sometimes you're just kind of done and you don't want to deal. So the example when Sharon said that she feels like Black people can racist, that made me cringe a little bit, just so you know. I felt more like, as a person of color, maybe sometimes I'll be a little hesitant walking into a situation based on past circumstance, which I wouldn't call as racism. I would call maybe, I don't know what the other word is, but I think it's important in your situation to go back to what the question was, is just know that you are not going to have all the answers. there's always going to be an exception. The best that you can do is come up with policies and procedures and conversations to do the best you can for your staff, for your company, for your families, and for your residents or clients.
Great.
Yeah, let me add on to that. First off, I agree 100% with our vets, and so let me just take this one step further. And a lot of times the families will tell you up front, hey, just want to let you know, my mom's a racist, or my dad he just spews out terms, and I just need to let you guys know ahead of time. And what we do, and I would love for Symbol to kind of respond to this as well, is just communicate with our caregivers and make sure that they are comfortable going into this. One of the things that we've always tried to do, with our caregivers is let them know the situation they're getting into. So if it's dementia, Parkinson's, et cetera, but kind of give them our team gives them a heads up saying, hey, this is a situation you're walking into. Are you comfortable with it? And if not, that's fine. We'll find another caregiver. And then communicating with the caregiver throughout. We have, again, a great staffing team that just says, hey, just checks upon our caregivers time to time. How are you? Not only do we care about how the family is doing with the caregiver, but it's also important for us, how is the caregiver doing with the family? So I want to kind of throw a question back to Symbol as far as saying, when we tell you that, when you find out a family's got racism, what is your tips for how do you handle that? And is, like our vet said, how do you get to, what do you do when you get to the point of, I'm not going to handle this anymore?
So I always appreciate, like, when I get my client list, like I work with Andrea a lot, and I would always ask her, what am I stepping into? I mean, I'm not a saint. Like, I would like to know what I'm stepping into. So she'll always give me, like, I need to know, like, am I dealing with a female? Not that I mind dealing with males, female, their age, what their, prognosis are, and then a little detail, like, what they're expecting. So they'll send me a thing like, hey, they're a little worried about little accents, or they're a little worried, like maybe you will not be able to take care of mom and dad or whoever. So I normally have a little feel from the beginning what I'm getting myself into. Obviously, I'm not going to get into a perfect setting where I'm going to walk in and automatically they're going to appreciate who I am and what I'm about to do. I totally put that on the back burner. Like, I present myself and then how to get a feel of them, where I stand with these people. And there's a lot of time, like, I go in and I have dealt with regular white Americans, Black African Americans, Hispanics, we deal with all kinds of different clients. Some you're expecting, well, they can't be racist, they're like me, but they are, and then you go in and you basically present yourself and see where they're feeling you. And then you go according to that. Like, you try your best, turn their negativity towards you into positive. Like, look, I'm here. I know what I'm doing. I'm here to help you. That's all I'm here to do, is to help you. They can take it. They can leave it. If it doesn't work out, company's great. Like, they normally will replace us with somebody different, but majority of the time, like, they'll always say, hey, can you call her back? Like, we're okay with it, So I think sometimes you just have to feel like what brought that negativity, in them. Like, I would always ask, hey, so what happened? Like, I heard the other one didn't work out. Like, what happened? And they'll tell me, well, they had an accent or this, that, the other. And I would always tell them, like, hey, look, I speak 4 languages, I said, sometimes some people are able to shed their accent, some people don't. By the time I said, we're all are good people. Sometimes we just need a chance to prove ourselves. But some people put the walls up and say, hey, these people have accents, or they're foreigners and they don't know what they're talking about. And I always tell them, I said, go on to the credentials. Like, we were trained, we know what we're doing. All you have to do is give me a chance, and we have to give them a chance to show us why they have that anger towards the medical staff, like all of our teams. Sometimes they have a bad experience at certain nursing homes, certain facilities. And I was telling them, I said, maybe that one bad apple gave you that bad experience, or maybe two of them did. I said, but you have to understand, like, what about the other five that you dealt with? Oh, they were great. I said, well, then you have to give some of us a chance, because not all of us are the same. And even the clients, we're not going to get the same clients. We just have to like work with them. We just, have to let them know that, like, basically I'm saying, proving them wrong, that you're feeling towards me because of looking at my name and being totally confused, just give me a chance. And I think a lot of them do, but there are a handful, they don't. But I guess, like, I forget the young lady's name. I think it was who was telling the story, how she felt like, she was being a little, racist towards the situation. I think we all have that in us as just human beings. Like, we have our little notions. And so some people just show it openly. Some people just don't show it openly. But as professionals, we just have to try to understand where somebody's notions are coming from. And we all don't have the answers. I don't have the answers, but I just try to understand. I've been through racism many times. Being from Pakistan, I always get, all your people are terrorists. That's what I get to. My husband is Black African American. He was a soldier. I got racism from the Black community, but it's not everybody. It's just that few little people. But we can't judge everybody from those few people. But we're the one who have to change things. Like, if they're racist against you, show them. There's no need to. We just have to like learn, and sometimes we can change people's minds, but sometimes we can't. We just gotta work through it.
Good, really good points, Sumbul. Thank you for sharing. Let's see, we got a few more questions. Let me run through these, get the panel's thoughts. Gwendolyn Lloyd says, I don't think people of color can really be racist, prejudiced. Maybe Black people don't have enough power to hurt people systematically. Any panelists can respond. Anybody like to share some thoughts on that comment? Let me read another one. Oh yeah, Cordell.
I agree. I know we've thrown that term out there, racist. I think people, if you're a group of people, if you're part of a group of people who have been downtrodden and treated a certain way, I think it is a normal reaction to look at people that are creating that or have that power to be able to discriminate against you. I think there's a normal, natural reaction that you may feel that when you're in certain settings, that same scenario is going to repeat itself again and again because you're the typical recipient for it. I think there's a difference between bias and a learned behavior that occurs based upon being exposed to racism versus having the power to be able, based upon being a racist, to use that to control or to take a group of people and put them in a position where they have little or no ability to respond. I think, whatever semantics you want to use, I think what we've said and talked about, today is about being able to expect that, if you're fortunate enough to have a David Posner or Todd Walrath as your employer, based on what Sumbul has shared, that they're going to look to be able to say, that's enough, we don't subject our people to this. I think that is, Sumbul said it well, in that we all come to the table with our beliefs. And I think the empathy piece that she talked about earlier, it's good if you can empathize. In our community, we have folks that will come in and they have some bias that's based upon their life and things that they've experienced. But I don't think it entitles them to be able to be disrespectful or to make someone else feel less than because of their life. or because of things that they feel or believe that have no legitimate basis. So I think, as we said earlier, each group's going to have to decide what the accepted level is that they're going to work with. But I think these kinds of conversations like we've had today, if there's another one and then another one after that, creates the opportunity for us to better understand each other and to work together. Because I don't know, if I'm David or Todd, you got to find some more symbols. You got to start there. And, you know, she's proven that. So the ability to have that kind of a talent level is based purely on opening your doors.
Thank you, Cordell. Good thoughts. Let's see. Karen Latimer asks, do you have any suggestions on how to move these conversations to concrete actions? As the panelists have mentioned, we've been having these conversations for decades. We need to move into change. Dr. Ash, yeah, I was going to say I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic.
Sure. Well, a couple things for me, and one thing that just jumps out at me is structural racism, and think about what the word structure means. So the answer to me is we gotta really hold people accountable and give this some teeth. I even put in the chat box, when it's important, you measure it. For example, metrics sometimes include being on time, how productive you are. Well, if diversity and inclusion is a core value, then it would be part of your performance evaluation. Just like being on time and being punctual is. So we've got to, this is a point where we've got to understand the depth of structural racism. We've got to examine policies and think about this. What's allowed, what's tolerated, what's not said. So we've got to enter the space where we're right now, where we think about what's allowed and what we need to stop allowing, what's tolerated and what we need to stop tolerating, what's not said, and think about we got to say it now. So we got to give this some teeth, hold people accountable. One of the ways to do that, like I said, is through your performance review. And I just think it's now's the time. Now is the time. Again, this how do we hold people accountable? You know, we can't kick this can down the road any longer. And the other point I want to make is there's always a dominant group. There's always a dominant group. My world, and it's okay to say it. I've been hearing terms like people and they. It's okay to say it. My world, the dominant group is white women. So until white women feel like diversifying the faculty is important, and diversity in my case is men in nursing, you take even equity, you know, the inequitable pay for men versus women. So until men think that's a problem, so we got to somehow get the dominant groups. You take even LGBTQ benefits and rights, until heterosexuals, the dominant group, acknowledges that this is a problem, we can't get to change. So for me, it's a couple of things: giving this some teeth, making it part of people's performance reviews, really examining our policies, what's allowed, what's not allowed, and giving this some teeth, holding folks accountable. That's where I think we go with this.
Great thoughts, Dr. Ash. And I've got one more question that's typed in, and I've got one more person with their hand raised. So let me first read Rachel Cohen's question. Seems like, this was referring to when you get that assignment where somebody might have some racial bias as a provider. And she writes, seems like an ethical dilemma. Even if a caregiver is willing to go into a home with racism, is it fair to put them in that situation? Very thought-provoking comment there. And while we're reflecting on that, it looks like Gwendolyn Lloyd has her hand raised. So, Gwendolyn?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Steve, for allowing this forum. And I thank all of you, Arvet, Cordell, Todd, Jeffrey, Sumbel, David, all of you had really good points. And I was the one that raised or at least said that I didn't think racism for Blacks is something that we could do, because I don't believe we have enough power or money to systemically hurt people. And that's what's been happening with us throughout the whole over 400 years now. But I would be remiss if I didn't say that in my experience in working, all of my promotions have come from white men. I've been felt to be little by women of color, and I'm a Black woman. And I believe that we are in a situation where we are a lot of times systemically held by standards that white people aren't. You know, there are measures put in place for us and I believe to stop us, like when we do go for a job and we are qualified. Some people have had issues in their background, like Black people who may have bad credit, but you want to work for a bank, but you can't because you went through a divorce and now your credit is bad. But, you know, these kinds of standards have to be looked at again. I know that we need to have the best people in these different positions, but in 1990, I was the only Black person in Baltimore County in this particular bank, and I could not believe it until I ended up at an employees meeting and looked around the room and saw no one who looked like me. But I just want to say that I'm glad we're having this conversation. I think it does begin with people individually, and these forums are really good. But when we go back, when we leave this forum and go back to our prospective workplaces, we have to make some stuff happen. I'm doing that now. I run a senior center, but my senior center has a plethora of all kinds of people, Black and white and, you know, Chinese, you name it. And they actually get along. And I think they get along because I am their leader and I take nothing less. So, you know, when we do have a problem, they bring it to me and we kind of hash it out. I think this thing we can turn this around, you know, one step at a time, one person at a time. And I just wanted to let you guys know that I am so grateful for listening to all of you. I think you all have good points, all the panelists and the audience. And Steve, thank you so much. I'll be getting on some more of these because it's very, very helpful.
Great. Thanks for sharing, Gwendolyn. And of course, you know, trying to wrap this up, but two more questions come in. So let me read through those and then we'll finish things up. Emily Fader says, are there any panelists aware of resources to provide individuals suffering from trauma related to the constant experience of systematic racism? Just unmute yourself if you've got a resource to provide individuals suffering from trauma from racism. Anybody? And then,
Well,
oh yeah.
No, I was going to say there's, well, I can't say specifically, but there's always support groups. I have found in this work, the best resource is folks who do the work. The folks who are involved in diversity and inclusion work. I have found that to be, over the years, my best source. It's almost therapy. They are, when you surround yourself with people involved in this kind of work, or while we might be separate or different industries, people are typically familiar with the work, what's your experience. The thing is, you want to get support, you know, for people who really understand, who know what you're talking about. So I have found colleagues and people who are involved in the work to be an enormous resource for support time and time again.
Great. Good point. And I know, you know, if you can't find a support group, you know, we have so many social workers and therapists in our field. Just outreach to an individual therapist to discuss challenges like this is a great solution. Judy Learman, building on a comment earlier, ethical dilemma indeed. Nobody should be asked to go into a situation with a known racist. Is cognitive impairment an excuse for racism? I don't believe so. And again, I really appreciate you sharing your perspective. And I think that's sort of the goal of today, is all of us sharing a variety of perspectives. And lastly, will the panelist information be made available to all attendees? Yes, I will share contact info for the panelists. I'll share their email addresses so that they're not flooded with phone calls. But that way you could email them and arrange for a conversation if that's what you'd like to do. Well, with that, I didn't expect this to go this long, but I think it was extremely valuable. Let's try to wrap this up now, but I'd like to give our panel members, if any panel member has an additional comment that they'd like to throw out there. Otherwise, what I would also say to the panel, any resources that you'd like to share with the audience, I'll be following up with everybody with the recording, with chat, and any additional information that you want to share. But at this point, if any panel members would like to say anything, otherwise we can wrap things up. Anything? Okay. All right, guys. Thank you so much to everybody for a great discussion. And I could see us diving deeper into this in the future. So I don't look at this as the last on this topic. Give me your feedback, and we can dive deeper into any aspect that we discussed today. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.